Please welcome Robert Pattinson, Josh and Benny Safdie, and Ronald Bronstein.
Well, you said there was no waters, and now there is waters.
Wow, you look very different. I can leave.
Yes, please. Honestly, we're gonna go something.
This is actually the third time I've watched it, and the movie moves just as much as it did the first and second times. It's just there's so much energy in it, and there's also so much going through your head when you watch it. I mean, you know, I was just reading your tweet about Howard Stern, that he said, you know, I've been watching this guy.
Our Oscars.
I've been watching this guy, and he doesn't make a dime. You know, he's like, he commits 87 crimes and doesn't make a single dime. So, I mean, he's a very complex character. I mean, how did you discuss this character with Robert? You know, I mean, how did you pitch this as a character? Because he has some unsavory sides to him.
Yeah, I mean, the French, no matter what the movie is, what the movie's about, the main character is just simply the hero, which I think is telling. When we first talked to, when Rob first, you know, started the communication, there wasn't a movie, there wasn't Good Time, we were, you know, on a highway towards this other movie called Uncut Gems, and there was, you know, it's been a long time, basically, trying to make this movie for about 5-6 years. And there's been these roadside attractions, like, oh, let's get off and make Heaven Knows Well, let's get off and make Lamb Cook. And then there's this like massive kind of sign saying mandatory detour. And it was like Rob's email saying like, hey, let's do something together. And, you know, there was no project. So I was just reading Executioner's Song by Norman Mailer for the first time, and it was, you know, it was perfectly in line with an ongoing obsession with the American criminal and the prison ethos in America. And Ronnie and I just recently downloaded every episode of Cops, and we were devouring those.
An American classic.
Best American TV show, hands down. And you know, the brother book, In the Belly of the Beast, and at the same time these two guys broke out of prison upstate New York, Richard Mann, David Sweat, and we were watching basically the country root for two guys who ran over people on purpose with a car, and murderers. And yeah, so we just kind of, and we all kind of agreed we wanted to make a movie that was dangerous, a movie that was pulp. And that was kind of how it began, and then the conversation grew, and we ended up writing trying to learn the characters, so we started writing his backstory, and the backstory was arguably harder to write than the screenplay, because it was minute one of life to minute one of the movie.
What is his backstory, if you could flesh it out?
Backstory is, in a nutshell, and correct me if I'm wrong, if you guys remember details, you too, Rob, is that he says this in the movie. He says that he alludes to it a couple times that his father's died, and he lives with, and the mother is estranged, issues with substance abuse, and they live with their grandmother, Nick and Connie, and I'm not going to go through every.
What is the capsule summary?
I'll go to some of the landmarks of his life.
What's his favorite color?
You want me to paraphrase?
Paraphrase. Yeah, I'd rather. I'm talking a lot about this movie. I'd rather hear Ronnie paraphrase it. Just don't forget about the car dealership.
I might forget about that. I might forget about that part. Essentially, he grows up with a very, you know, in this hostile sort of negative environment, living with his brother and his grandmother. He's angry, and he takes his anger out on the brother. He's vicious, he's malicious, he's quite violent, and just generally cruel to his younger brother. They end up sort of splitting up. You know, he's forced to leave the house. He goes down a bad road. He ends up in prison. In prison, he has a kind of, I guess it's a kind of enlightenment. You know, I don't know if it comes from reading the Bible and running across Joseph, but he suddenly sort of fancies himself as this kind of provider, that he has a mission, that he has that his sort of purpose in life, which he's never sort of felt before, is to reconnect with this brother. And that's what he does. He ends up sort of writing letters, and he sort of turns the brother against the grandmother in an attempt to sort of fortify a bond that wasn't sort of built organically. And when he is let out of prison, his plan, and it's kind of a nitwit plan that's sort of borrowed, you know, from basically from bad movies, you know, is that he's going to get his brother out of the city, which he thinks is a toxic environment, away from the grandmother, and into the woods. He has no relationship with the woods. I mean, it's really a thoughtless idea, and you know, and that's sort of where the movie begins.
And we actually had emails. Rob would email me as letters from jail.
In character.
Yeah, in character, and then I would respond as Nick, and then Ronnie and Josh would see those emails, and it would just kind of be this kind of backstory that we would have, where he had the experience of trying to turn and understand how to talk to Nick, and Nick had the experience of having to reacquaint with this guy who he hated, and just all of that complication was built into both of the characters, and then that informed the writing and all that stuff.
And I mean, Rob, how do you approach a character like that? I mean, part of the way it looks in this movie is you take every single. I think I might be repeating myself from our interviews, so I hope you don't remember. But it seems like you approach every exchange like you're calculating a little, like what does this person want? How can I make happen what I need to make happen right now? So, what's your thought process for each of these scenes?
I mean, I think he's someone who thinks that, I mean, really simply that the world is against him, and every single minute of the day is just a problem that has to be dealt with, and it's just a never-ending series of problems, there's no particular aim. There's no. I mean, it seems like it's you know, he's doing it all for a purpose, but it's just. I think he only sees it as problem solving. It's just I think that's where his propulsiveness comes from in a way. It's just like the world is constantly hitting him, rather than him having some kind of end goal in mind.
Yeah. And did you want to say something?
No, I was just going to point out that Ronnie deliberately left out the uncle's car dealership.
Key detail. Well, I mean, what is it like shooting this movie? Because you watch and you get the sense that it's just, you know, at any given time, the real police might bust in, you know, in any of this.
There were a handful of real police in the movie.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So they were busting in because we asked them to be in the movie.
So you invited them.
Yes. Well, it's interesting you say that, because for the New World Mall, we were able to get that location and secure that location, but we shot it as if we were stealing the shot. So even though we had a detail cop there telling, like, don't hit anybody when you're running, like that's the only rule he gave us, we still set up the cameras as if we were going to steal it when we ran in. So it's like, if we get caught, we at least have the 2 shots. And then, of course, we went back and got more.
And the cops are looking at us like, you know, why are you moving around so surreptitiously? You have the location. And, you know, it's just second nature to us. You know, you kind of put that out there in the air, and it comes back to you in interesting ways. I mean, in our casting, you know, from Rob, we basically tried to turn him into a street casted, you know, character, you know, and with developing his background so obsessively. Same thing with Jennifer, and a lot of the actors in the movie, the first time actors, are adding, you know, they come with no baggage, so there's no preconceived, you know, perceptions of who these people are. So and they feel. They can pull at any moment from their life of character development, essentially. They've been developing that character their entire lives. So, and you take that concept and you put it up against, you know, a moviegoer sees, you know, Robert Pattinson or Jennifer Jason Leigh or even Barkhad Abdi, who I think completely disappears into his role. And something's happening there. There's a chemical thing happening that I think speaks to what you're saying. Like, you feel at any moment the cops could break into the movie. And when I said there are real cops in the movie, like there are real cops in the movie.
The guy in the hospital? Or no?
The guy in the hospital is actually a character actor, Robert Clohessy. And I pride myself that day we had Robert Clohessy and Craig Mum-Sims, who were both on Oz, which was like the only other TV show that I've really ever seen. And they said they had never been on a set since the TV show. So I was, no, but there were, like, you know, the police montage, the rapid fire police montage, there are a couple of real cops in that scene. There are, you know, in the jail sequence, the shaved head, white shaved head correctional officer, he was the commissioner of jails of New York City. About 2 months before we started shooting is when he stepped down, and now he's running prisons in Nevada. He just let the juice loose. And no, but my point is that we're peppering throughout. I mean, and you know, and a lot of the inmates in jail, you know, are friends or friends of friends or people who we met. The casting department met through halfway houses and you know, and they're basically dictating the blocking of a scene. They're saying, no, actually, it wouldn't happen this way. And
the riot wouldn't happen that way.
Well, no, there was a moment in the jail where we had created this feeling in there where a riot actually basically broke out amongst everybody. It was just this feeling of like oppression and just the heat just overcame everybody, and it devolved into this chaos that at one point we were just trying to capture, and then of course we went back and got into it. But one of the things that was very new to us was, okay, now we have all these locations, we have permission to be here, we have a bigger crew. How do we still keep the energy from some of the movies we've done in the past? How do we keep that kind of feeling within it? And you know, there's lots.
It goes back to that element of danger and pulp, and I think all great genre movies that I've always responded to were you know, just by nature of being kind of without moral in a weird way, are reflections of the time. And I, you know, I hope and I believe as a viewer, when I can actually sit and watch the movie, that I feel that this movie is a reflection of this time.
Yeah. And Rob, what's it like working in that environment of danger? To pose a melodramatic question. Because you know, like, it's, you know, stolen shots. It's less like you know, let's say Lost City at Z, which is another movie, a fantastic movie. You know, everything has to be really planned and working in the jungle and so.
It wasn't
Oh,
planned
was
at all. We went there the wrong season. Anything else? I mean, it was the rainy season. We only shoot like 2 hours a day.
So you wanted something safer like this movie, did you?
Yeah, I remember talking to you while you were on set, and you were like, we might cut out any second, the towers are falling down.
The whole country's falling fine over there. But no, I don't know. I think with this, definitely the environment they create really it's really helpful for performance. I mean, it's just, you know, it's a chaotic mood within the world of the movie is very chaotic, and it kind of to have that level of energy just induced all the time, and then, but also I've always felt with all of their movies they feel very frenetic, but they also feel incredibly controlled and detailed, and you know, that is their kind of unique skill, and that's kind of what I wanted to be involved with.
Yeah, and I'm going to kind of out you as an extraordinary cinephile. You seem to watch a ton of movies, so I'm sure you watched. Well, I mean, I don't know. You would watch this No Fear No Die Claire Denis movie, which I don't even think is available on DVD. I found out, and but so you must have seen some of their other movies, like Heaven Knows What as well, and Daddy Longlegs at some point.
Before I met them, no, I hadn't seen them.
No,
I had it.
yeah.
I only saw them afterwards.
Did you regret it when you watched it?
No, but I mean, I do. I like that. I mean, that's the other part which I like to. It's very, very difficult, especially. I think there's very few people who can successfully make anti-hero characters, and like I just feel like, you know, if you look at Daddy Longlegs, for instance, I mean, it's kind of all your movies kind of have that same lead where you know, we were talking about it earlier in Daddy Longlegs when you both of you say, like, you know, you don't know whether you're supposed to be rooting for this guy or not, and it's like, no.
I love them always.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's like, it's to all intents and purposes. It's like, of course you're not supposed to be rooting for these characters, like, you know. But it's like, there's some kind of alchemy that they create where you're just like, oh, I want to support someone who's doing the wrong thing. It's kind of an interesting thing to play, and it also it gives you a lot of freedom in performance as well.
I'm sure there's some questions from the audience that we can add.
So I just wanted to add, there's a logic. Each one of these characters has a logic. It might not necessarily be the right logic, but it is something that you can follow and kind of move with. So even if he's doing terrible stuff, you can still understand where he's coming from in his thought process. It's not like you're watching an alien. So that's why you kind of find yourself moving along with them because.
I think that Connie, you know, in the beginning we introduce him as a hero, quite literally. Like he is, you know, and I very much see the movie from Connie's perspective at times. I understand. I have empathy almost for, you know, for his perspective on, you know, the trappings of you know, bureaucratic system, you know, a citywide system that is literally looking to just turn Nick into another number, and the concept, you know, at, let's say, the name of the, what do we call the name? Crystal Vision is the name of the group, the societies, that they think that they can change the brain from the outside. And Connie genuinely believes that you can't actually do that. The only way to change the brain is from the inside, and the only way to change it from the inside is through experience, and the only way to get experience is to kind of induce it at times. And that's why his idea, the idea of saying, hey, I can help trick my brother into being independent and being free, and I'm going to do it through teaching him that he can be independent, is a great idea. His execution is maybe questionable.
It needs some work.
Yeah, like it's maybe he's a romantic in a way. So he's like, oh, I'm gonna rob a bank. People rob banks because of movies, basically.
You can actually, like, you can rewind it all the way back to when we were doing Daddy Longlegs. You kind of paused us when we were looking at the script, and you're like, wait a second, this moment right here, you could lose the entire audience. And it was just, I don't remember you. I remember, like, it hadn't even occurred to us that that was even a thing. It was just like when he drugs, when he drugs his kids, we're like, okay, let's just move. We're gonna then he drugs his kids and he goes out and Ronnie's like, whoa, like you have to like take this as a serious.
It's those moments where you're putting the viewer in a spot, a genuine spot.
Well, I mean, the whole movie is like that. There, I mean, you're caught up in the action, you're caught up in this great character study and absorbing everything. But there are a lot of other undercurrents going through there. I mean, there's sort of an interesting racial thing going on as well that he kind of takes advantage of in an interesting way. You know, the fact that, you know, when the police arrive and they see the security guard tied up, they obviously assume that he's done something wrong. And I'm kind of guessing that race is playing a factor.
Yeah, of course. You know, this movie takes place today, and when you're making a genre movie, specifically a kind of a thriller, a one night, you know, cops are after you film, I guess I'll call it that. You know, you're as an audience member and as a creator, you're kind of saying you're constantly putting the viewer in a position of, oh, would you, the plausibility, would that happen? Could you get away with this? And as writers, we found ourselves almost in like a stream of conscious, you know, we knew the characters really well, and we, you know, write through the scenario, and we would always, if he got caught, if we couldn't figure out a way to get Connie out of a scenario, he would get caught, and that would be the movie. But we always did kind of survey, you know, the scenario, and we thought about it as, you know, New York in 2017, and that moment is definitely like, yeah, it's a strange thing to think that it's plausible. And it's totally plausible. As a viewer, you just roll with it. And the fact that we roll with it, we should be thinking about that. Because, you know, the fact that two white cops walk in to a amusement park in the middle of the night, and first of all, Connie, who, you know, more or less looks like a scumbag, but he's, you know, a white scumbag, and you know, is just telling them, you know, that this man on the floor, and they just take it as fact. And like, you think if the situation was switched, would that be necessarily the case? I don't know. And then when the scene immediately following it is the only two people who are detained are the two black people in the scene, and they're the innocent ones. And it's, I don't know, it's our DP, like he cried in that moment, and he was like, oh, it's so emotional. And he said it was for a different reason, but I don't know. I think that it was for another.
But that's a good moment. Just a shout out for the DP, Sean Price Williams, who does amazing work. I mean, it must have been even hard while doing the movie to know that it would come out looking that beautiful in a way. I mean, it's almost like you look at it and think, "Oh, this looks too good," you know, because it's
no. I always want it to look better, and we can always do better, always. But
we definitely were going.
But that's not a fault.
We were definitely looking to motivation in very extreme places, to the point where Sean would look at us and there'd be like a little red light coming from the doorbell, and he'd be like, "Do you want to motivate the scene with that lighting?" We're like, "Yeah, it's not a bad idea." You know, we were really going crazy with the colors.
No, and he had a very specific, one of the more conceptual conversations we had. He was like, yeah, once he gets his brother off of out of the hospital onto the accessoride, that's when the film enters kind of a surreal kind of rabbit hole, and the colors start to get a little more twisted, and things start to look a little bit stranger. Yeah. And he was very deliberate about that, because it's a lot of fluorescent, kind of office-like lighting up until then.
Yeah, no, it looks amazing.
And he knew, but he also knew. He's like, look, I was like, listen, I want to make a popcorn movie. Like, we always think of our movies as being blockbusters, and that's not funny. That's not funny. And I'm not joking. I'm still not joking. But we consider this movie like a piece of termite art. It's like a movie that you can be entertained by and basically injected, and you're just watching and coming closer and closer to the edge of your seat. And then at the end, when you get home, you realize these termites have found their way in, and they've kind of burrowed into your soul. And then you start thinking like, well, what did that mean, and why did this happen, and why did I feel this way about that character? And of course we get blessed with the king of termite art at the end of the movie with the Iggy Pop song. So, that's a term. I think, Ronnie, did you coin termite art? Did you come up with that?
That's from a famous essay.
Okay, sorry.
Written by.
I don't read.
It's not who you steal from; it's how you use it.
No, I never claimed ownership of it. I just said it. But yeah.
I was just about to talk about New York, but I thought that because you're both New Yorkers, right?
Yes.
You grew up in New York, so I mean, what was it like to kind of rediscover the city in this way with locations?
Well, it's interesting coming from the last film, Heaven Knows What, which was based off of reality. So each location was kind of tied to the main actress's emotional state. So there were certain points that had to be in a certain area, or it had to be on a certain stoop. There was not as much leeway to really explore the city in the same way. You could explore this environment, but things were very specific to her headspace, and locations then in turn affect acting, so we needed to be true to that. Here, we had a lot more leeway because we could literally go and create something completely new, and we could go and look at the iconic locations all around the city that aren't the Empire State Building. That it was really sad. We went to go look at the bank, which we thought was this beautiful place that had been there for a while, and they had completely torn down the whole front, the facade, which had this beautiful.
What about the Mangorico? That whole building is gone.
And the bronze wall is gone. Yeah, and then the entire where Rob runs away from Nick, and where they get out of the Mangorico, that whole building is just gone. This is 2 months ago. The whole city is literally just like collapsing on itself.
2 months ago, but yeah.
But no, that's what they said. They tore the building down. It was 2 months ago.
Sorry.
So it's just, you keep chasing it, but then what the idea is that there will be new neighborhood landmarks, and I guess in this film we were trying to discover them and keep with that idea. I just like the ability to create from the ground up. There was something nice. There was a freedom that was back.
Personally, the big thing remember when we were writing, we went to Adventureland? Yeah, but we grew up, you did as well, right? Going to Adventureland. Adventureland is like, it's an independent amusement park in Farmingdale, New York. But it's there. It's right. It's not that far from the city, and I think it's only changed ownership once. But it's
been renovated a lot.
Yeah.
Since
Well, that tree is gone. The tree.
Yeah, it was. I mean, we went there because I remembered it as
the tree, the haunted house tree, right?
I knew exactly what it said.
Exactly. What did the tree say?
Chainsaw.
Yeah.
Yes.
Chainsaws. I don't like chainsaws.
But they still have
between a tree and an owl, animatronic.
Yeah.
And they had the throwing up guys. They still have him. He's kind of like buried off to the side.
But it was so cheap inside this haunted house. There were like just Judas Priest album covers, just taped to the wall. It was that. So I mean, that's why we went out there. And then we went out there, and it was much nicer. Completely redone.
Yeah. But it was interesting to rediscover, this thing as a kid. It's massive. When you get there, it's a parking lot.
But imagine if
there was a
no
roller
offense
coaster. Adventureland.
No, but imagine if there was a roller coaster in the middle of this room. That's kind of how it feels.
It's very strange.
And Rob, what was it like encountering each of these locations? I think they seem to offer a lot to you as an actor you can play off of.
Yeah, I mean, definitely everything. I mean, it's kind of. I didn't even really feel. It's funny because everyone's talking about how New York a movie it is, and like my understanding of New York is like so different. I mean, it felt so alien and foreign. I mean, even watching the movie, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily think it's like. My first thought isn't like, oh, this is a New York movie. I mean, to me, the first time I saw it, it looks like a sci-fi movie. It's crazy. But yeah, I mean, it's all of these areas. It's weird. I don't know why. Right from the beginning, it just felt like when you're playing characters that are very, very, very fringe, on the fringe of society, and you're not playing them as film versions of those fringe characters, but genuinely fringe. It definitely does. It feels like you're an alien. It feels like you're in these, like, I remember when we were doing the makeup tests, and I was at Josh's apartment, and that's when we first realized this, doing these like acne scar things, and I was just living around the corner, and like, it's like a nice area of Harlem, like it's kind of, you know, I was like up until that point being like, ooh, it's the artisanal bakery or whatever, and then suddenly like I was walking around with basically trying to look like a crackhead, and suddenly as soon
when the makeup was too extreme.
Yeah, it was like the first thing I was like a full-on crackhead, and I was like wandering around to see like how you're affected, and just walking back the 4 or 5 blocks to my apartment, suddenly all these crack dealers come out, and everyone's thinking you're trying to get this deal, and I've been walking up and down the street with absolutely not even seeing this alternate reality that was around me the entire time. And I think a lot of the time when we were shooting the movie, every single time we went to this location, like if you went as a normal person, you would have seen it as one thing. And if you went within the context of the movie, it felt very, very, very different.
Yeah. And I mean, and the kind of interesting flip side to it is the unexpected kindness that your character keeps encountering, which I don't know, somehow for me is also woven into like city experience. That a lot of it's really awful and loud and cruel, but then there's just like a understanding with people that somehow quickly happens.
The one thing I'll always say is everybody says, oh, New York is such a mean place, but if your car gets stuck in the snow, you'll see how many people will come in and help you push it out.
0.
In some ways. I'm the first guy there, and then there's like 3 people behind me who push it out of the snow. It's just like, but then you just go on with your day. You know, there is something to that. But in addition to we also don't treat the city with like white gloves on. You know, we're treating it as if we've lived here and grew up here, and it's like, I remember walking up 5th Avenue on like 25th Street, and I saw this whole group of people crowded around. I'm like, what is everybody doing? Like, I was getting very angry, pushing through everybody. And then I turned around, and there's the Empire State Building. They're all stopping to take pictures of the Empire State Building. But like, wasn't even in my head, you know?
Oh yeah, that.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I want to give the audience to ask a few questions. So if you have any questions about the film.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, we kind of despise exposition, and it's just I'm never really that interested in it when it's being told to you, when it's being spoon-fed to you. And I think what you're feeling is when you see the tip of the iceberg and you know that there's a massive one underneath the water, and that goes into all the work that we all did in the writing and their performance.
It gave me the opportunity to really fill it in, you know. For
Exactly.
myself.
Benny likes to talk about
Yeah,
how, you know.
it's like if you see somebody on the street and you're like, oh my God, that guy or girl looks interesting. You start following them from that point on. You have to fill in the blanks. And that process of filling in the blanks is so exciting because if they lie, you see how they lie. If they tell the truth, you see how they tell the truth. And that, on top of everything else, makes the narrative more interesting because you're learning about somebody and you have like you'll grasp for the littlest kind of glimmer that you get from them.
I do believe that a viewer likes to take ownership of a movie, and they like to be engaged with it in that way. And I think that allows, you know, by not being so overt about things, it allows for that.
But we did do a lot of stuff together, like weird little. We went to that garage for it was 8 hours, but I just kind of tagged along as Nick, and he was there talking to the guys who worked at this auto shop. And I felt as Nick, the circle was including me at first in the conversation. People would look at me and talk to me. But then as they realized my limitations, the circle just kind of closed and just pushed me off to the side. But I was still there, and Rob as just being Connie, had to know what it was like to have a brother who is developmentally disabled, and that's just what's going to happen when you take him somewhere. You know, you can't just take him somewhere. So there were a lot of things that we did that just kind of sat in our heads. One of those things was the emails, you know, that were, I kind of got angered by certain things he said to me, or you know, there was one email where I remember I got really upset with you about even trying to talk to me again. It's pretty insane.
Yeah, I mean, and also, I mean, following up on Josh's comment about a sort of aversion to overt, you know, exposition. You know, it's that feeling, it's a tricky thing, you know, because then when you're doing so much background work and you're really attempting to inject as much nuance as possible into a piece of work, you know, you're accumulating so much data that you can put into the film. You can put it into the script, you can put it into the performance, you can put it into the edit, you know, but at the same time, you know, there's a kind of, we're all sort of share the same kind of value system where we don't want anything to be in the movie if in a kind of garish way it feels like it's only there for the benefit of orienting the audience. And we're constantly looking to sort of pull that stuff back. So then it becomes interesting because for us it's hard to say. We know through some kind of form of osmosis this background information is there and it's being communicated, but it's hard to pinpoint exactly when. I mean, in the case of, you say, of Mice and Men or the brother relationship, you know, I think there are things in the movie that that would make a viewer doubt how close they really are and how well he really knows his brother, you know? But their exchanges, I mean, really we're limited to just these exchanges in the beginning. So what's there, you know? What is it that's communicating that? Because it is there, it's sort of hovering around, you know, in a meaningful way, you know, in terms of how you read the movie. You know, how well does he know this guy? How deep is his concern for him? You know, he's kind of a monomaniac, you know, is this just something, he's a very self-centered human, so, you know, how deep does it run, and, you know, his sort of empathy and sympathy for this other person? I don't,
yeah.
What's he getting out of this, you know?
Yeah, there are a number of relationships like that where you're kind of trying to think it through and figure out where it ultimately will head. I mean, we should also mention Jennifer Jason Leigh's character, which is a great, you know, performance you plop in, then that relationship is also just, and then her with her mother, you know.
But you know, I'm sorry.
Played by Rose Gagaria.
You know what's interesting, again, as far as just this aversion to narrative exposition, if you really think, like, to get an inside window into that Jennifer Jason Leigh, that entire section, you know, is that, you know, from a writing point of view, Josh and I, like, no scene can exist if its only purpose is to, and primary purpose, is to move the narrative forward. You know, that's sort of a rule. It just grosses us out, you know? If there's no way, because there's no way to inject nuance into that. And, you know, we tried. I mean, the whole purpose of the bail scene, right? If you really think about it from a structural writing point of view, is that we need some way to communicate that the brother is in the hospital. And where's he going to find that? He's not going to find that out by calling the jail. You know, it's not going to make it to the newspapers. So it has to be, well, that's where we landed on this bail scene. But then we originally wrote this scene that was just him go. I mean, it was essentially the whole scene was just waiting for the bail bondsman to drop this information. And we were so kind of humiliated by the results that that really the Jennifer Jason Leigh is really kind of a big, elaborate smoke and mirrors. It's a way to create a kind of internal drama and tension that's really just there to distract you so that we can slip in this bit of narrative information, which is entirely essential for the forward progression of the movie, you know, in without you even realizing how lame it is. You know what I mean?
And then you layer that onto, like, yeah, that then in turn makes the editing so much more complicated because you have now 5 different conversations that are happening at once. Like, there's so many different perspectives that are crossing, and character relationships are changing, who's above, who's below, and it just we were literally making our lives so difficult just to get that point across.
Yeah, and we're, you know, I mean, like, you know, not to oppose that, but the only thing that's helping is, like, I really wanted, after we watched this thing, I really wanted to see Connie's. It was like a thing early in the script that we ditched, Connie's girlfriend. And then you were like, all right, we'll give you the Connie's girlfriend. And but it's,
I wasn't interested, and he was, so. You know,
and I had the smoke and mirror and the writing an insane backstory, and you know that was my pitch to Jennifer, who is one of my favorite actresses, who literally disappeared into the role and then actually disappeared into the movie. Like, she just never comes back, but she's incredible. she really like understood this idea of someone who really hangs on Connie as kind of a catalyst for, you know, her own life of despondence and living with her mother. Trivia note is that the mother was played by Rose Gregorio, who is an actress and the widow of Ula Grossbard, who made the movie Straight Time, which is, you know, whatever, a little bit of an inspiration of this movie.
Oh, it's a great movie.
Yes.
You had mentioned Iggy Pop earlier, and the end sequence where his track was featured really added to the poignancy of it. How did that collaboration come about?
So Daniel, One O Tricks Boy Never, the composer, we had spent about 9 weeks doing the score religiously, like Thanksgiving, New Year's, Christmas, you know. And we had, you know, a handful of music. We always thought that the ending would have a piece of music that was licensed. It was a pre-existing piece, and we tried a lot of different ones, and they never really worked. And we realized that we have such a bespoke score, and such a powerful one, that we had to continue that kind of tradition with the film. So Dan wrote a piece, a piano-based piece, and put a vocal track over it. And he said, you know, we all agreed there should be vocals on it, but it's tough because there's dialogue in the scene. And he was like, you know, I was like, well, who could do the vocals for a song like this? And he's like, I don't know. How about Iggy Pop? And I was like, how about Frank Sinatra? And honestly, it just doesn't. It seemed ridiculous of an idea. And he's like, no, seriously, I think he might like the movie. I can get to him this, that. So we showed him the movie. He really liked the movie, and he said, yeah, I would like to sing on this track. And he wrote the lyrics. We didn't know any of them going into the recording session. I didn't know anything. Never actually spoke to him until we were in the session. And then he just said, hey, I have some stuff I want to sing, and I have some spoken word bits that I want to say. And it was like a sound of God, voice of God. It was incredible. And he is the king of termite art. And he's such a poet. And he really, really blessed this movie with a beautiful interpretation of it. Like, he genuinely saw the movie from Connie's point of view and Nick's point of view. And he gave us the pure and the damned. Like, he really gave that to us. And I think if there's any justice, that guy deserves an Oscar for that song. I really believe that. I think it's incredible.
And what was so hard about finding the right music there is that when you hear music at the end of a movie, you immediately think, okay, the movie's over. When the credits roll, you think the movie's over. You can get up and leave. But there was a lot of stuff that we still wanted the audience to experience that was important. So we kept trying to think, what could it be? You know, what could actually get there? And I think everything we tried always had to signify, like, okay, this is the end, and it just didn't work. But when Iggy added his kind of voice to it, it almost acts like a narrator from above, and it keeps you in your seats, listening and watching, and there's perfect pauses for certain questions, and it just allows you to experience the ending how we wanted it to be. You know, you can actually see the crossing of the room through to the end, even though when the credits roll and he does start engaging, you can leave. But that's what it was nice to have a piece of music that didn't end the film, but just kind of existed with the film to its proper end.
Ending with him saying, well, the movie actually ends with the word love, but he.
And
that concept of petting the crocodiles.
Yeah, it ends with, like, this beautiful Nick point of view. Like, oh, I can go and pet the crocodiles. That'll be great.
Hi there. I was curious to hear a little bit about where the device of the mental ability came in to the storytelling.
We'd end with an easy one.
Take that, Ron.
Yeah.
Oh, well, several years ago, I was working on a different project of my own, and Benny was one of the main actors I was working with, and we collaborated on this character. As a matter of fact, so that character comes from that project, which, you know, whatever. I don't know if it's that it didn't find funding or it just hit its natural sort of expiration date and became like spoiled milk, but I just gave up on it, and that character, you know, was always just sort of sitting around waiting. It had been so well developed, but at that point, Benny was kind of like a pencil neck. You know, he was very skinny, and he hadn't started working out yet, which he had been doing for another role. So it was, you know, when Josh and I, you know, sat down to start writing this movie, we didn't really have two ideas to rub together. I mean, it was really just like, go. And then this, you know, Josh had brought to the idea that I wanted to start with a bank robbery, and it was like, well, how do you infuse pathos into a bank robbery? He's like, well, okay, well, if you partner yourself with a mentally handicapped person, that automatically to me that was very appealing. It was intriguing. I could work from there, you know. So the character was just grafted into the movie, and then that opening scene. You know, my wife's in the audience right now. There's a version of that same scene between her and Benny. That's
7 years ago.
7 years ago. That's almost identical, not in tone.
Because Nick got much more angry and hardened.
And he's much kinder, you know, and more of a paternal figure, the social worker. But that scene was, you know, taken and imported.
To the point, even to the tear, down to the tear.
Yeah.
I mean, we wanted the tear, like when she, that was like a 45-minute interview that we did. You know, it was just kind of this exam that I was taking with Mary, and it was at one point she asked me a question, and I started crying, and it just affected me, and I didn't know why, and it just happened. And then when we were going into making the movie, it was like, it's got to happen on the salt and water. That's when it's got to hit.
The backstory of that character was essentially, you know, it was Nick if he had no brother, you know, and was just in this struggle, locked in the struggle with his grandmother, who was worried about her mortality and could see that she was going, you know, at some point she was going to pass, and she just had this, you know, she was providing for someone who had no way of taking care of himself. So she was trying to, you know, get him on, you know, Social Security disability and trying to get him indoctrinated into some system that could provide for him, you know, once she was gone. And that's really where this movie sort of picks up, except there's this brother that's now appeared to just sort of mess everything up.
It was like a kind of an aggressive character thing, because it was like Ronnie's like, okay, I want you to go inside yourself and figure out your insecurities or your emotional limitations, and we just kind of took those and exaggerated them. So, you know, like,
the crazy thing is that, remember, we weren't going to.
There's always something here that's kind of preventing me from crying, and like
He cries in nearly every rehearsal. From 7 years ago.
He does.
Yeah.
Still, he cries every day. No, but we remember originally we were talking about casting. We were thinking about casting an actor with real disability, and we went very far down that path. And you know, our casting department, we were meeting with a lot of people. That ended up being very helpful for Benny, but we weren't. It's not like it was a game. We were really thinking about it, and then we realized that the movie was just too. The schedule was too aggressive, and the scenarios were too kind of arduous to kind of work with someone with disability, and it would have ended up being like we would have had to manipulate someone to get a performance and get them to do things, and that was not interested in that in any way. Morally, technically, there was just nothing interesting there. And then Benny because Benny the whole time was saying like, I can do it. And we knew that, and then he ended up going in and doing an interview with the casting director to send to our financiers to prove to them that Benny could do it. And he went in and did an interview as Jordan Weissman, who is basically tricked into going to meet a casting director, who the casting director is actually meeting him to play this character Nick. So he's doing this interview as someone who's developed 7 years prior, and kind of different looking. So the financiers saw it and they knew Benny. We went there, did the song and dance, got the money for the movie. Like they knew who Benny was, and that they're watching this thing and they can't actually place it. Like, oh, that is no, his Jordan. There was
something very, for me, it was just interesting to go back to this character and just be like, okay, what would change about him? You know, what would happen? And yeah, like Ronnie said, I was 150 pounds, and now I'm like 185. I put on more weight for this because I realized that, look, if this guy looks stronger, it affects your opinion. It also affects the way people interact with him. If he wants to do what he wants when he wants, and he physically can do that, that changes things. You know?
You also put on some dad weight because your baby was born.
Well, no, that's true. But I switched my exercise because I had known how to gain weight for certain exercising.
I know. I'm
just saying. I had known. Because it was whatever. I started eating.
He said, I think he should be heavier.
I started eating a lot of whey. The eggs came back into the picture.
It's an artistic choice.
Yeah. Hey, look, I don't know.
Well, I'm afraid that's all the time we have, but
thank you everybody for watching.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you. Film Society.